Have you ever embarked on a journey driven by duty, only to meet someone who made your heart tremble in fear of your own desires in the desolate grasslands of Gray Hollow? A lonely man longed for a simple bride, just to heal his emptiness. But when she appeared, her gentle beauty and the deep pain in her eyes made him understand that sometimes the things we need most are the things we fear to face. If it were you, when her past brings danger, would you step back for safety or step forward to protect the one who makes your heart come alive? Would you dare choose love, even if it requires you to stand in the storm of others? Imagine yourself standing in the cold western wind, having to decide whether to hold on or let go of a person who is shivering and looking for shelter. What would you do? Join us in this emotional story, where every choice has a price and every soul deserves healing. If you love deep and heart-touching stories, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join us on this storytelling journey. The January morning stretched like a gray blanket over Gray Hollow. Before the sun had even risen above the eastern hills, mist was flowing down the valleys, clinging to the dry wooden fences around the Mercer Ranch. The wind from Windfall Ridge whistled through the cracks in the door, carrying with it the familiar smell of snow and loneliness. Winter in Montana was not just cold. It felt as if the world had closed in on him, leaving him sitting alone in the large cabin, with its time-stained fire and a silence that lasted longer than the snow. Elias Mercer sat there, his bony hands gripping the pen as if he were holding something too heavy for him. He had used those hands to lift bales of hay, lead horses, build fences, mend rotten wood. But writing letters was perhaps the hardest thing he had ever done. The veins in his arms tightened with each word he wrote, as each word dragged a part of the memory he had tried to hide under the barren soil of this farm. On the table, the oil lamp flickered rhythmically, illuminating the pale yellow paper that he had placed in front of him for more than an hour, but had only written the first line. I need a life partner, plain, steady, willing to live a quiet life. Just that. And he sat there staring at that sentence for a long time, as if waiting for something else to come up. But there was nothing but the same old silence that had followed him for 7 years after his wife, Anna, died of a terrible lung disease. Her death had ripped his heart out, leaving a void that Elias had never dared to approach. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his chest, making him shiver. Elias pushed the window open just enough to look out at the vast white land outside. The rows of cow footprints stretched out like hesitant dots on the snow, and the stable roof bowed under the weight of the ice. A solitary, simple life, requiring nothing more than silence and the daily chores. And it was because of that loneliness that Elias sat here, trying to write a letter that should have been easy for a man who had spent half his life writing. But he was no longer easy with anything related to his heart. He wanted a wife, not beautiful, not striking, not someone who reminded him of Anna or of what he had lost, a plain person, someone who could help him cook, clean, and take care of this house that was too big, someone who spoke softly but without being demanding, someone who could live peacefully with him in the wilderness without making his heart beat like it used to. Someone who didn't scare him, the feeling of being alive again. Elias dipped his pen in the inkwell and continued writing. His handwriting was not beautiful, slanted slightly to the left. As heavy as he was, I don't need love. I don't expect much. I just need someone who knows how to keep quiet when the wind blows, and knows how to smile softly when the fire crackles, and knows how to live with me in the most peaceful way possible. He paused, thought, then continued, If anyone is willing to come to Montana, I will have a carriage ready to meet them at Gray Hollow Station. Please send a reply as soon as possible. Elias folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and sealed it with wax. He read the address again, Mountain Hearts Matrimonial Agency, Denver, Colorado. Then he stood up, put on his thick, frayed goatskin coat, put on his faded brown cap, and walked outside. The wooden door closed behind him, making a heavy sound like the house sighing. The walk from the porch to the gate was only 60 yards, but in the bitter cold it felt like an endless, lonely journey. The sky was gray, the ground was a snowy mess, and only the sound of his footsteps faded into the silence. Elias tied the letter to the saddle of Blaze, an old, dark brown horse that had seen him through countless winters. He stroked its mane, a rare gesture from a man who rarely touched anyone or anything. "Come on, old friend," Elias said softly, his voice low and husky, like wood soaked in the night dew. It took them about an hour of riding through the white hills, crossing a wooden bridge over a frozen stream, before they reached the small Gray Hollow post office. The building was only about 300 square feet, but it was the only place within a 10-mile radius that had light and life. The postmistress, Mrs. Turner, who was in her 60s, squinted when she saw Elias coming, sending a letter again. "Elias, who is it?" For this time Elias put the envelope on the counter. "A matchmaking agency," he said, breathing heavily. Mrs. Turner was silent for a few seconds, then nodded slightly. Her eyes filled with the understanding of someone who had seen countless men in the West struggle with loneliness. "What do you want in a woman?" "Elias?" she asked. Elias looked down at his snow-covered boots. "Someone as unassuming as possible." Mrs. Turner laughed softly, but it was not mocking, but a sad laugh. "The heart, Elias. It never listens to reason. That's why I chose the plain one," he replied, his voice as firm as rock. Elias left the post office feeling both relieved and indebted to himself. Not money, but a confession. He was afraid that the old pain would resurface, afraid that the loneliness would disappear, afraid that some woman would come, bringing with her a light that he didn't know how to face. He shook his head to clear it away. The winter had been too long, and a man who had gone through most of his life needed nothing more than a roof that wasn't too cold and a woman that wasn't too beautiful. Beauty never brought anything but separation. No one in the town of Gray Hollow knew that that letter, small, humble, would bring with it a headwind so great that it would turn Elias Mercer's heart upside down. A wind named Lydia Shaw. That afternoon, the Gray Hollow train station was bathed in a pale, honey-colored winter sun, washed out by a cold wind. The westbound train from the south slowly rolled into the station, its wheels scraping against the rails, a long, lingering sound that echoed through the valley. The sound, to the people of Gray Hollow, was a rare sign of change. In a place where no stranger had set foot for months, the sound of a train became an event. Elias Mercer arrived at the station half an hour early on Blaze. He was in no hurry, but he couldn't stay at home. Even though he had told himself 100 times that he was only picking up a plain woman, someone who was destined to spend the rest of his life with him, he still felt a nameless flutter in his heart, a very small, light feeling, like the shape of a leaf touched by the wind. He stood by the old cast-iron lamp-post, holding the reins. The cold wind whipped at his face, but Elias remained calm. A few townspeople stood nearby, looking at him curiously, but no one asked any questions. Elias had always been the type of person people only dared to look at from a distance, not because he was unapproachable, but because he was so quiet. The sound of steam coming from the engine brought some of the town's children out to watch. The train stopped. The doors opened, and a small stream of people began to disembark. A businessman, an elderly couple, a postal worker. All were dressed in familiar Western attire, heavy coats, scarves, wide-brimmed hats. None matched the description the agency had sent him. Elias glanced at the second carriage, wondering if she might not come. Maybe his letter had gone unanswered. Maybe the woman had changed her mind. Or worse, maybe someone else had claimed her first. Then he saw her. Not that she got off noisily. Not that she looked for him or looked around anxiously, as women new to the West often do. No, Lydia Shaw got off the train with the air of one who had known too many sorrows and had learned to hide them with absolute silence. The townspeople standing nearby seemed to draw in a collective breath. Such a woman appearing in Gray Hollow was something never seen before. Lydia wore a deep blue long coat with a white sheepskin collar, simple yet elegant. Her brown hair was tied back in a bun, a few strands of hair blown away by the wind. On her calm face stood out a pair of deep, calm eyes like a winter lake, beautiful but carrying a heavy weight. She wore no makeup, no show, but every step had an elegance that made people unable to look away. No one needed to ask to know she was not the plain woman Elias wanted her to be. At that moment, Elias felt his heart tighten, not from excitement, but from fear, an old, familiar fear, but one he had not dared to face for a long time. She was so beautiful, beautiful in a way that no one in this part of the world dared to touch, beautiful in a way that reminded Elias of what he had tried to bury for 7 years, the beauty of his lost wife and the pain that followed. Elias stepped closer, standing still for a few seconds as if searching for words. "You are Lydia Shaw." Lydia looked up. Her eyes, though weary from the journey, were bright, the way of someone accustomed to the dark. She nodded slightly. "Yes, I am Lydia." Her voice was low and deep, unwavering, unhurried, like someone accustomed to keeping to herself, a voice soft enough to soften the chill air of Gray Hollow. Elias took a breath, trying to steady his emotions. "I am Elias Mercer." She smiled slightly, a very thin smile, almost a flicker at the corner of her lips. "I know. I recognized you from your description. Let's go," Elias said, trying to keep his voice even. Lydia nodded. She had brought only a small suitcase, old but clean. The way she held it suggested it was the only thing she had left of her former life. He helped the suitcase onto the carriage, keeping a safe distance. There was a long silence between them before Lydia said softly, "It's colder here than I thought." "Montana winters are not very kind to newcomers," Elias replied, his voice still low and calm. "It's okay." "I'm used to the cold," Lydia replied, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, a simple statement that suggests something deeper, as if the cold in her life is more than just the weather. They started out of the station. Blaze pulled the carriage slowly over the dirt road that had hardened into stone. The wind blew hard, shaking the pine branches, but the two remained silent. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was like two shadows walking side by side, each carrying its own story. After walking a distance, Lydia asked softly, "Is your farm far?" "About 12 miles. About an hour." She nodded, tightening her robe. "I don't mind. I came here to start over." Elias wanted to ask, "Start over from what?" But he didn't dare. Not because he lacked curiosity, but because he knew that everyone had a darkness they could only tell when they were ready. After a moment, he spoke again, as if to fill the gap. Gray Hollow is a peaceful place. Not many people, not many things, just land, winter, and work. That's what made me choose this place. Lydia turned her head, looking out at the endless white fields. "Wherever there is peace, that's where I'll choose." The words made Elias sink. He recognized in that simple sentence a quiet weariness and a desire to live where no one would hurt him anymore. Elias nodded slightly, then remained silent for the rest of the journey. As the carriage topped a small incline, Mercer Ranch emerged into the evening light. The large log house, the large stable, the long hillside fence, and the old silvery well. It was not beautiful. It was not majestic. But it was Elias's whole life. Lydia looked at the place for a long time. "It's so peaceful," she said, almost in a whisper. Elias breathed slowly, as if there was something in that statement that made him feel a little lighter. "I hope you won't be disappointed." She didn't answer, but her eyes searched the farm as if she were searching for a shelter, not a home. perhaps for the first time in years. Elias begins to understand that Lydia's presence will not only change his life, but will also force him to confront things he has avoided for so long. The carriage pulled up in front of the Mercer Ranch cabin as dusk fell. The sun had slipped behind the mountains, leaving behind a last faint glow. A cold wind blew through the distant pines, carrying the scent of dry earth and light mist, a scent Elias had always known for in Montana in the winter. He stepped out first, tied the reins to a wooden post by the porch, and turned to help Lydia. But she didn't reach out right away. Lydia looked at the wooden steps as if considering something. Her deep eyes reflected the light from the window, making Elias notice the small uneasiness she was hiding. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand on his. Her hand was cold, thin and light, and Elias unconsciously squeezed it carefully, as if afraid of hurting her. She stepped out of the carriage. As they stood on the hard ground, snow fell lightly on their shoulders, melting into small droplets. Elias opened the door, and warm yellow light poured from inside, cutting through the darkness that surrounded the farmhouse. "Come in," he said, his voice low but softer than usual. "I lit the fire early." Lydia nodded and stepped inside. The wooden house appeared more clearly under the light. It was a large, simple, and clean space. A pine dining table was placed in the middle of the room, with a few old but sturdy chairs. On the shelf were ceramic cups and a kettle of steaming hot water. To the right was a fireplace set in a stone niche, the fire burning steadily, sending warmth towards the two people standing. Elias observed Lydia's reaction. He was not used to having people in his home. In fact, since Anna's death, no one had been in this room but him. Perhaps that was why he was a little nervous, but Lydia just looked around, not curious, not judging. There was only a silence that stretched like a sigh of someone who had gone too far and finally stopped at a peaceful place. "Your family is very kind," Lydia whispered. Elias paused, a little surprised by her choice of words. "Kind. Not much stuff, not much noise. Just gentle." Elias looked at the house, seeing it for the first time as someone else did. "There is less here, less stuff, less people, less change. But enough," Lydia said, her eyes on the fireplace. "Enough to breathe." That made Elias stop. He said nothing more, just placed the kettle on the table as if to calm himself. He pointed to the bedroom on the left. "This one is yours. The bed is made. There are sheepskins and washcloths. If you need anything, just ask." "Thank you," Lydia replied softly. Elias was momentarily confused. The thank you, so genuine, so light and so natural, left him at a loss for where to place his hands. He sniffed, then turned to pile more wood into the fireplace, using the warmth of the fire to hide his embarrassment. A moment later, Lydia placed the small suitcase on the table. She opened the lid and took out a hand-embroidered tablecloth. The stitches were fine and meticulous, the pattern simple but delicate. "I brought this with me. In the places I lived, women used to spread this cloth on the table to keep the house warm." Elias looked at the cloth, then at Lydia. "You don't have to do this right away." "I didn't do it out of obligation," she said slowly. "I did it because I needed something familiar." Elias stood still. The truth hit him. There was no weakness in Lydia's face, only a long-suppressed weariness. A weariness he understood, because he had felt it himself. She gently spread the cloth in the middle of the table. The cloth instantly transformed the room from a bare place. It became like a home. Even though it was just a piece of cloth, it carried the feeling of being inhabited, of life, of human warmth. Elias swallowed. "This house hasn't been cleaned in a long time. Beauty isn't the goal," Lydia replied softly. "I just want it to be more alive." He paused. watching the flames flicker in the hearth. This farm lives on work, but the house, it needs more. Lydia sat down on the wooden chair. Would you like to tell me more about this place? There's not much to tell. Elias frowned slightly. The work started at sunrise and ended at dusk. It went on like that for years. Don't you feel lonely? Solitude is sometimes more pleasant than confusion, Elias replied, his voice low, especially after what has happened. She didn't ask further, didn't press. Instead, Lydia nodded slowly, as if she understood the feeling all too well, a sympathy that didn't need words. The atmosphere between them softened, no longer awkward, just the silence of two souls too used to living in their own darkness. A gust of wind blew across the roof, rattling the windows. Lydia flinched, but regained her composure. Elias noticed the reaction, but didn't want to question it. The wind here is fickle, he said, but this house is strong enough to withstand much worse storms. She looked at him. Thank you. For the second time that evening, Elias was at a loss for words, but he noticed something strange. Lydia's presence did not make the house feel heavier. On the contrary, it made the wooden walls seem warmer. When it was time to rest, Lydia stood up, hugging her shawl lightly. I'll sleep early. Thank you for the hospitality. Elias nodded. If you need anything, my room is across the street. She nodded, then stepped into the room. Before the door closed, Elias caught her eye one last time. A look that held more than sadness. It held caution, loss, a fragile hope. Her silence spoke louder than any words. When the door closed, the house was so quiet that Elias could hear his own breathing. He sat down in a chair, looked at the fire in the hearth, and realized what was troubling him. From the moment Lydia got off the train, he started to feel scared again. Not afraid of her, but afraid of my own heart. Elias Mercer had hoped for someone plain, someone who wouldn't move his heart. But the woman in the wooden room wasn't plain at all, and that made him feel alive. The feeling he thought he had forgotten. Lydia's first morning at Mercer Ranch brought the faint smell of smoke and the steady sound of wood burning. The dim light from the windows illuminated the wooden beams, revealing the tiny cracks left by time. The room she slept in was small but warm, with a thick fleece blanket covering the bed and a small wooden table by the window. Outside, snow fell thinly, covering the ground in a light white mist. She sat up, her feet touching the rough wool carpet. The silence slowed her heart, as if the house were saying there was no one rushing her, no one making noise, no hand covering her life with control or fear, a feeling Lydia thought she would never experience again. Outside, Elias was preparing breakfast. The clanging of metal on pots and pans was steady and steady. He had woken up very early. In fact, Elias always woke before dawn, as if by reflex from having lived alone for too long. As Lydia left the room, he turned back. Did you sleep well? She nodded. It was very quiet. Elias set the pan of bacon on the table and poured more hot water into the earthenware cup. There's only the sound of wind and the wood burning. If you hear any footsteps other than mine, you're probably mistaken. The remark brought a small smile to Lydia's face. I'm not sure I'm used to so much quiet, but I think I like it. Elias looked at her, only briefly, but there was something in his eyes that was both surprised and softened, as if he hadn't expected her presence to fit so well in this house. They ate breakfast in silence. It wasn't a heavy silence, but a soft, deep one, like those winter days when you only need to hear the clink of glasses on the table to know you're not completely alone. Lydia ate slowly, her hand holding the spoon, not shaking, but her eyes occasionally strayed as if she was thinking of something far away. Elias noticed it. He didn't ask, but his heart was moved in a way he couldn't explain. A woman like that, appearing from somewhere, brought a silence deeper than any darkness in his house. After breakfast, Lydia took the initiative to clear the table. "I can do these things. Don't worry." Elias leaned his hands on the back of his chair, looking at her for a few seconds before speaking. "You don't have to do everything right away. I want to." The answer was simple, but firm. Not trying to be clever, just someone who wanted to create order so he could feel safe. Lydia spent the morning pacing the house, getting to know every corner. She touched the countertops, feeling the worn wood. She opened the oven door, feeling the heat. She walked through each room, not curious, but trying to find the breath of the place and blend in. Elias stood on the porch, watching her shadow move back and forth through the frosted glass window. He noticed something strange since Anna's death. No one had entered that space without making him feel like they were invading his memories. With Lydia, it was different. She entered without breaking anything, without overwhelming, without replacing, just present, as lightly as someone placing a hand on water without making a ripple. At noon, the wind grew stronger. The pine trees in the distance leaned back and forth, their branches rubbing against each other, making a sound like a whisper in the forest. Lydia sat by the window for a long time, watching the scene. Her eyes held no fear, only the silence of someone who knew that the wind sometimes comes not to knock you down, but to test who is still standing. When Elias returned from the stables, he found Lydia rekindling the fire. She placed the logs carefully, as if they were her business. "You've done this before." "Yes," she answered, her voice low but firm. "Where, somewhere. I don't want to go back." Elias was silent. Such an answer was like a door that opened a crack and then closed again. He did not knock again. He knew how people answered like that. He himself had said the same thing when asked about Anna in the early years. In the afternoon, Elias took Lydia to the stables to show her the routine of the farm. But he didn't force her to do anything, just explained. Blaze is the oldest. Shadow is the easiest to ride. You don't have to ride if you don't want to. I've ridden before. You ride a horse. Elias frowned, genuinely surprised. Not very well, but I know how to keep my balance. He looked at her. The seemingly fragile woman, for a moment, appeared with the quiet endurance of one who had traveled far and beyond. "Do you want to try?" "Not today," Lydia said. "I just want to know what awaits me here." Elias nodded. He understood. She wasn't afraid of horses. She just needed a day to adjust to this very different pace of life. In the evening, they ate together. A simple meal potato soup, toast, thick-cut bacon. Lydia ate slowly but cleanly and neatly. Elias watched her every little gesture, not out of curiosity, but because he didn't want to miss any signal that might make her uncomfortable. After dinner, Lydia sat near the fireplace. He poured her hot tea and handed it to her. She took it, her hands gently cupping the cup as if seeking the familiar warmth. "First day. Was it okay?" She looked into the fire instead of at him. "Better than I thought." There was a long but not uncomfortable silence. Lydia took a sip of tea and said softly, "I know you want someone else." Elias was startled. His heart skipped a beat. "I don't understand. You wrote the letter. You wanted someone plain, unassuming, with little reminder of the past." Elias squeezed the arm of the chair lightly. "Did you read that much into me?" "I didn't read it," Lydia said. "I only realized it because I wanted the same thing." The room instantly became deep, not dark, but deep. Elias sat up straight. "You want someone without emotions, because emotions can make you lose everything." Her words were like an invisible string that pulled Elias back 7 years ago. To the morning he picked up Anna's gradually cooling body. He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. If your presence makes you uncomfortable." "It's not you," Lydia said softly. "I just don't know what would happen if my heart started to beat again. A fear like yours. a cut like yours, a darkness like yours. If you want time, I will let you have it, Elias said softly. Lydia nodded slightly. Thank you. I'm not ready to say too much yet, but I'm not running away. Elias looked at her for a long time. Me too. For the first time since she arrived, they looked at each other like two people standing on the edge of pain, and both wanted to cross over, even though they didn't know where to put their feet. When Lydia went into the drawing room, Elias remained by the fireplace, the firelight reflecting off his pensive face. He whispered to himself, as if confessing something he dared not say in front of her. I expected someone plain, but she wasn't plain at all. He closed his eyes, and he was afraid. But the fear wasn't all bad. Dinner that night began like any other dinner at Mercer Ranch, but the end opened a door neither Elias nor Lydia expected. The kitchen was warm from the fireplace, the smell of stew from the cast-iron pots filling the house with the faint scent of memory. Outside, the wind blew harder. The rustle of pine trees echoed through the roof like a nameless winter song. Elias stood by the stove, ladling the last of the food onto plates. He glanced at Lydia as she arranged the cutlery on the table, each movement slow and precise, like someone accustomed to keeping her hands busy so her mind wouldn't wander. Her shoulders were thin, but not weak, as if she had endured more than anyone could see. It's colder than usual tonight, he said softly. Lydia looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I feel the wind. It's like the wind in Denver when it's almost snowing. Did you live there long enough to leave? The answer was short, but it held too much that was left unsaid. Elias did not press further. He knew that when people said long enough to leave, it was a mark of a wound they did not want to touch. They sat down to the table. The meal was simple: carrot stew, toast, and some vegetables brought by Mr. Nelson from town. Not fancy, but comforting enough for someone who had been through many lonely seasons. Lydia ate slowly, her expression calm. Elias took a sip of water, put down his glass, and asked, Did you have many new things today? No, she replied. I like new things, when they don't make noise. Elias chuckled, a rare laugh that softened the hard lines on his face. On this farm, the loudest thing is the wind. I think you'll be fine. Fine is something I haven't felt in years, Lydia said, her voice as small as the wind passing through the door. Elias paused. You are not okay. Lydia set her spoon down on the table. Her fingers trembled slightly, but only for a moment. It's not something we should talk about at dinner. But she looked up, her eyes downcast. Do you think some things get worse the more you hide them? Elias looked into those eyes, deep, quiet, but filled with darkness. I think there are things that are only made lighter when said at the right time. And the right person, Elias replied without hesitation. There was a moment of silence. The fire in the fireplace crackled. Outside, the wind whistled through the wooden walls. Finally, Lydia spoke. Do you know why I chose to leave Denver? I'm not sure I should guess. Lydia sighed, not a sigh of exhaustion, but the sigh of someone trying to pull a heavy memory from deep within. I was once engaged. Elias moved his hand slightly, but he kept his composure. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. I do, Lydia replied, her voice quiet but firm. I've been running from it for so long. I don't want to keep living like I'm running away. She looked into the fire. His name was Patrick Hale. He came from a prominent family. I met him at a party. I was young and naive and thought rich men were nice. Elias listened without saying anything. All he did was keep his eyes on her face, as if to say he was there. But he wasn't nice. Lydia continued. Patrick controlled everything. What I said, what I did, even where I looked. He said I was his. Her voice caught for a moment. I believed it. Elias sat still, his hands clenched unconsciously. And then what happened? He hit me. The words fell like a stone thrown into a still lake. No one said anything more. The fire in the hearth seemed to burn slowly. Lydia reached up and touched the side of her jaw, where there had been a bruise that was now gone. Not once. Not because of my fault. Just because he wanted things his way. She lowered her voice. I wanted to break off the engagement, but his family was powerful. I was threatened, watched, forbidden to leave the house, until one night, an old maid opened the door for me to escape. Elias felt his throat tighten. You did the right thing. It was right, Lydia said, her eyes glistening but not shedding tears. But I had to disappear, had to leave everything behind. I lived in cheap lodgings for months. I read in the papers that Patrick had married someone else just a few weeks after I disappeared. She smiled faintly. I think I should be relieved, but human emotions are not that simple. I no longer believe I can belong anywhere. Elias didn't know what tone he used to say the next sentence. You belong somewhere, even if it takes time to find. Lydia looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge the truth of his words. Then she nodded slightly, like someone who doesn't quite believe him, but wants to. The air in the kitchen was thicker, but not heavy. It was like a blanket that had been thrown off for too long, bringing warmth slowly, gently. At the end of the meal, Lydia whispered, I don't know what my future holds at Mercer Ranch, but I do know one thing. This is the first place, I don't have to be afraid of anyone when I dine. Elias swallowed. I would never scare you. I know, Lydia replied, because you don't talk much, and people who talk little don't hurt people with their words. Elias bowed his head, taking that as a precious word of trust. Before she entered the break room, Lydia turned back, her hands resting on the armrests of her chair. Thanks for listening. I don't tell my story easily. Elias softened his voice. I know. Her bedroom door closed, leaving the kitchen bathed in a golden glow. Elias sat alone at the table, his hands resting on the rough wood of the old dining table. He never wanted anyone near his pain. But tonight, he sat next to a different kind of pain. And strangely, it didn't take his breath away. It just made him feel human. Elias looked towards Lydia's room. She wasn't plain, not plain at all. She was a woman of darkness, but so strong that even his silence changed. He thought to himself, as a new fear opened up, if her heart begins to believe in this place, I must not disappoint her. The next morning, Mercer Ranch woke up to a fog that was thicker than usual. The gray sky seemed to be covered with a layer of cold cloth, making the ground beneath his feet sink slightly, damp and still. The wind was not strong but persistent, seeping through every crack like a whisper of winter that did not want to leave. Elias got out of bed very early, lit the oil lamp and put on his familiar leather jacket, then went out to check the stables. Every morning was the same, but today was a little different. In his heart there was not only the silence of the years, but also the imprint of the story last night. Lydia woke up early too. She stood by the window, watching the faint lines of the distant mountains as if they were fading into the mist. Her eyes were quiet, but her heart was not. After months of hiding, living like a shadow, she was now in this warm cabin, where no one yelled, no one gave orders, no one controlled her every breath. It made her body feel strangely light and tense, as if she did not dare to believe this was a tangible reality. She changed her clothes, put on a scarf, and walked out to the kitchen. The only light in the kitchen was a half-burned oil lamp, the heat from the stove still retaining some of the heat from last night. She gently lit the stove, put the kettle on, and prepared breakfast. Her hands were familiar with each movement, as if she had done these things in a faraway place. A moment later, Elias entered. He paused for a moment when he saw Lydia standing by the stove, her hair glowing a pale gold from the fire. "I thought you were still asleep," he said, his voice deeper and warmer than usual. Lydia turned back, smiling faintly. "I heard you go to the stables. I didn't want you coming back into the cold kitchen." "It's not cold," Elias replied, but his eyes glanced toward the burning fireplace, as if silently admitting that he knew it was cold before she arrived. Lydia set the plate of bacon and toast on the table. "You've been working since before the sun came up. I can't let you go all day without eating." Elias was a little confused, not upset, just unfamiliar. "You don't have to do everything." "I don't do it all," she said, her voice soft as fire. "I just do enough to feel useful." That made Elias quiet. Sometimes you don't need much to survive, but you need a lot to feel worthwhile. He knew that. The two of them ate breakfast in a rare silence. When Lydia spoke, her voice was soft, low, but had the depth of someone who had walked through the darkness. "How long have you been living alone?" 7 years. "And you don't think about leaving this place?" "No. This farm is the part I keep. The others, I let them go." "Because of your wife?" Lydia asked very softly, as if afraid to touch the unhealed wound. Elias put down his glass slowly. "Yes, Anna and I built everything here. When she died, I had nowhere else to go." Lydia nodded. "I know how that feels. Do you understand?" "Yes. When I ran away from Patrick, I only took the suitcase. Nothing else. Not even myself." Elias looked at her, slow and understanding. "Are you finding yourself here?" Lydia smiled weakly. "I'm not sure, but I feel like this place doesn't repel me." "This farm has never turned anyone away," Elias said, then added something he didn't expect to say. "Especially you." Lydia didn't reply, but her eyes softened, as if his words had touched a place she had never dared let anyone else touch. After breakfast, Lydia followed Elias outside, not because he asked her to, but because she wanted to understand the rhythm of life here. A thin layer of snow covered the stable roof, and the horses sneezed as the cold air touched their nostrils. Elias taught her how to tie the reins, check the horses' hooves, and pour feed. Lydia learned slowly but surely, each movement carefully, as if each action was a step toward returning to real life. While working, Elias caught a glimpse of her lightly touching his left shoulder. "Does your shoulder hurt, no? Just an old habit?" "What habit cover the bruise?" Lydia said eerily calmly. "But now, no one hits me any more." Elias stood still. Her words did not waver. His did. He wanted to tell her that no one should live with such a habit, but he knew that anything he could say would only make the wound hurt more. Instead, he said softly, "You're safe here. No one can touch you if you don't want them to." Lydia looked up. The wind blew her hair slightly to the side. "Thank you." Her voice was a breath mixed with mist. At noon, Lydia cooked a small pot of soup. The steam rose and fogged up the windows. Elias sat across from her, watching her every move. In just a few days, she had transformed the house. Not loudly, not brightly, but quietly. They finished eating. Lydia put down her bowl. "Elias, I have something to ask." "Just ask," he replied, his eyes still gentle but deeper than usual. "Do you find my presence uncomfortable?" Elias leaned slightly toward her. "No, really," he said without hesitation. But why?" Lydia asked, her voice low, as if afraid of the answer. "But sometimes you remind me of things I've tried to forget." Lydia clasped her hands together. "I'm sorry." "No." Elias shook his head. "It's not your fault. It's just, I didn't expect to feel anything anymore. But your silence, the way you walked around the house, the way you looked at the fire, it reminded me that I was still alive." Lydia bowed her head. her voice as soft as the wind touching the surface of a lake. "I am also learning to live again." There was a long moment when the two of them looked at each other. Not as strangers, not as people forced to share a home, but as two people listening to the beat of something very fragile, but very real. The afternoon passed in that rare peace. That evening, as Lydia was about to go to bed, she paused in the doorway. "Thank you, Elias, for the little things today. Sometimes it's the little things that keep people alive," Elias replied softly. Lydia nodded, her eyes quiet but warm. "I think today I lived a little longer." She entered the room. The door closed slowly. There was no sound of strong wind or heart tightening like the day she first arrived. There was only a very thin, very soft silence, like a promise yet to be formed. Elias stood alone in front of the fireplace, his hands on the wood, a feeling both familiar and distant rising in his heart, the warmth coming from another person. Something he had not dared to hope for in many years. It had been snowing since the afternoon, but the winter storm didn't really hit Gray Hollow until midnight. The wind howled through the Mercer ranch roof like the howl of a torn prairie. The house shook slightly, and dustings of snow whipped against the windows in silver streaks. Elias had weathered dozens of such storms, but this night was different. For the first time in 7 years, there was another person breathing in the room next to his, Lydia. She had gone to bed early, or so Elias thought. He sat before the fireplace, the fire still burning red. The flames were breathing their last, the orange-brown light flickering across his face, uninvited fragments of memories. Every gust of wind that shook the window made Elias feel his heart waver. In the wind, Elias heard something else. Footsteps. Light. Hesitant. Then a gasp. But held. He stood and walked toward the hallway. In the dim light, Lydia was leaning against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself as if to keep herself from melting. Elias called softly, "Lydia." She started. Her eyes were both frightened and hazy, as if unsure what was reality and what was memory. "I'm sorry." Her voice was trembling and thin as a thread. "I couldn't sleep. Storm scares you." "No." Lydia shook her head, but she said nothing more. Elias saw how she clutched her left shoulder, the same place she had touched when she had told the story. He moved a little closer, not close enough to make her feel pressured, but close enough to make her feel that she was not alone in the stormy night. "What is keeping you up?" Lydia closed her eyes. "I heard the wind hitting the door. It was like—" She swallowed, her voice breaking into small pieces. "Like when Patrick gets angry?" Elias was silent, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew that any hasty words would only cut her deeper. Lydia continued, "I know it's just the wind. I know this isn't Denver. It isn't his house. But my body—" She put her hand to her chest. "It doesn't believe what I know." Elias felt his throat tighten. He wished he could pull the wind out of the night, hold the house together so it wouldn't make a sound that hurt her so. But he was a man, not a god. She took a deep breath, trying to catch her breath. "I'm sorry to bother you." "I don't mind," Elias replied immediately. "Never." She looked at him, her eyes still misty with fear. "I want to be strong, Elias, but sometimes the past is like a storm that won't go away." Elias nodded slowly. "Every storm passes, though sometimes it recurs." Lydia bowed her head, her shoulders shaking slightly. There was no crying, just the slight trembling of someone exhausted by memories she did not choose. A sudden gust of wind hit the window, making the glass rattle. Lydia jumped back, her hand reflexively raising to cover her face in an old self-defense habit. Elias stepped forward. "It's all right," he said, his voice deep and steady as an old pine. "I'm here." There was no fear in his voice, only the calm of someone who had endured his own pain for so long that he understood how to ease the pain of others. Lydia took a few quick breaths, then slowed down. I hate myself for it. Don't, Elias said immediately. You survived. No one has the right to hate that. Not even you. Lydia looked up. For the first time. Her gaze wasn't observant, not wary, but as if searching for support in a real storm. Elias said slowly, "If you can't sleep, I'll light another fire. You can sit here until the wind dies down." She hesitated a moment. "Is that okay?" "Okay," Elias replied firmly. "Do whatever makes you feel safe." Lydia sat down in a chair near the fireplace. Elias added more wood, and the fire flared up to a warm golden glow. The room felt brighter, larger, and less windy. Lydia reached out to the hearth, her slender hands searching for the normal rhythm of her blood. "After a while," she said softly, "why are you being so nice to me? Because I know what it feels like to face the long night alone," Elias replied after a few seconds of silence. Lydia looked at him. "You used to be like that, too." "I'm still the same," Elias replied with rare honesty. The wind outside picked up again, but Lydia didn't flinch this time. Maybe it was the warmth of the fireplace. Maybe it was Elias sitting just a few feet away. Or maybe it was because she wasn't completely alone tonight. After a moment, she asked softly, "Elias, do you ever think you will feel anything other than pain?" He stared into the fire for a long moment before answering, "There was a time when I thought I had no heart left. But then, you came into this house, and I realized my heart only sleeps for so long." Lydia flinched, as if the words had touched a place she was trying to hide. "I don't want to remind you of something you don't want to remember. No, you remind me I'm still human, and that doesn't scare me." That made Lydia look down. "Elias, I don't know how long I'll be here. I don't know how much I can trust in this life, but—" She clasped her hands together, her voice trembling but sincere. "Thank you for tonight." "Not because of me," Elias said, "but because you are strong enough to not run away from your memories anymore." A long moment passed. No wind, no sound, just the warmth of the fireplace and two people sitting close together without touching. Lydia let out a soft breath. The first breath that night that didn't smell of fear. "I think I can go back to sleep." Elias stood up. "If the wind gets too strong tonight, just knock on my door. I'll be awake for a while." Lydia nodded. "I will." She wanted to say, "I will try not to bother you," but for once, she didn't say that. Instead, she just said, "Good night." Elias watched her enter the room. The door closed, as softly as the last breath of a fading storm. Alone by the fire, Elias noticed a small crack in his heart. But it wasn't a crack from loss. It was a crack of a door beginning to open. The morning after the storm, Mercer Ranch was strangely still. The ground was covered with a fresh layer of snow as bright as milk, so soft that each footprint was as clear as the imprint of an untold story. The wind had died down, leaving only a light chill across the roof, carrying the last breath of last night's storm. Elias woke early, but not for work. He slept fitfully all night, unable to get the image of Lydia shivering in the hallway, the wind howling outside and the old fear resurfacing in her eyes. He had never seen that weakness in a woman. It didn't look like weakness. It looked like a deep wound long unseen. He stepped out of the room, hearing a slight crash in the kitchen. Lydia was awake. She was kneeling before the fireplace, feeding each log carefully, the firelight reflecting off her face. She no longer looked panicked like last night, but still somewhat fragile, as if the wind got any stronger, she would have to brace herself again. Elias stepped closer. "Can you sleep?" Lydia looked up. "Better than I thought." The storm made her tired. "Not the storm," she said, her voice low but clear. "It's what the storm reminds me of." Elias was silent. He didn't want to push her into that memory again. Lydia put down more firewood, then stood up. brushing the wood dust off her skirt. "I want to thank you, Elias. If I had been alone last night, I might have run outside, knowing how foolish that would be in a storm." Elias looked at her deeply. "You don't have to run anymore. Not here." Lydia didn't reply, but her eyes softened as if his words had hit just what she needed to hear. The two of them worked on the farm all morning. Lydia helped Elias shovel more snow, check the wind-whipped fence, and re-sweep the porch. Despite her slight frame, she worked with a tenacity that surprised Elias. No complaints, no avoidance of the cold, just quiet work, as if working helped her catch her breath. Around noon, Elias told her to go inside first. "I have to go into town, buy some more salt for the cattle, and send in my tax return." "You rest." Lydia nodded. "Do you need me to come with you?" Elias hesitated for a moment. He wanted her to come with him. He wanted her to see the town, to see that he lived beyond his four walls. But he also remembered how she had shivered last night when the wind pounded on her door. Maybe she needed a quieter day. "No need," he said softly. "Just rest. I'll be back soon." Lydia smiled. "I'll prepare lunch." Elias set off. Blaze walked slowly over the fresh snow. The sky was clearer, the rare winter sun shining in streaks across the ground. The air was crisp, but Elias was still uneasy. He didn't know why. Maybe it was Lydia's vulnerability last night. Maybe it was the way she smiled this morning, so faint he feared the slightest thing would make it disappear. When Elias arrived at Gray Hollow, he tied his horse in front of Mr. Douglas's general store. At first, things went normally. He bought salt, rope, and some leather. But as Elias was handing Mr. Douglas the money, the store door opened and a strange man walked in. He was tall, wearing an expensive leather jacket and boots too clean for someone who had lived in Montana long. His face was handsome in a city kind of way, not a Western toughness. He walked in with the air of someone used to being noticed. Mr. Douglas greeted him, but he only nodded vaguely. Instead, he looked around the shop as if searching for something, or find someone. His eyes stopped when he saw Elias. "You are Elias Mercer." Elias stood up straight. "Yes." The man smiled, but it was a cold, sharp smile, not at all friendly. "I didn't think meeting you would be so easy." "Who are you?" Before he could say his name, Elias felt a chill run down his spine, even though the fireplace in the shop was burning red. "I am Samuel Hale." The last name hit like a punch in the chest. Elias knew it instantly. Hale. The same name as the man Lydia had run away with. "Patrick Hale's uncle," Samuel added, his voice deliberately slow so that each word would sink in. "I came to find Lydia." The atmosphere in the shop suddenly became tense. Mr. Douglas stood frozen, the scales in his hands frozen. Elias felt his blood rush faster, though his face remained calm. "Why are you looking for Lydia?" Elias asked, his voice low, each word heavy as stone. "Because Patrick wants her back," Samuel replied casually, as if he were talking about reclaiming something. "Our family doesn't accept that she ran away. We know she left Denver. Finding her trace will be difficult, but not impossible." Elias clenched his fists. "She doesn't want to come back." Samuel shrugged. "That's none of her business." Elias took a step forward, his eyes hard. "She's safe here." Samuel tilted his head, smiling faintly. "Are you sure a man like you protecting a woman like Lydia?" "What do you know about the Hale family?" Elias replied in a low, snarling voice. "I know enough to stand between her and anyone who would hurt her." Samuel looked at Elias for a long moment, then smiled. "Good, because I will return. When I have news from Patrick." He touched his finger to the brim of his hat. "Goodbye, Mr. Mercer." He left the shop, walking lightly as if carrying no wind. But to Elias, he brought with him a veritable storm. Elias stood there for a long time. His heart no longer beat normally. His own old pain did not frighten him as much as the pain Lydia might face again. He turned his head to look at the door. He had to go home now. Not because of the lunch Lydia was waiting for, not because of the unfinished work, but because someone who once trembled in the stormy night was standing in the light of peace for the first time. And Elias swore that no one would take that away from her. Never. Elias urged Blaze to run faster than usual. The snow under his hooves broke into loose flakes, spraying up the sides like water. The cold wind stung his face, but Elias paid no attention. Only one sentence echoed over and over in his head. Lydia had to know. She had to be prepared. He couldn't let her be caught off guard by the thing she'd been running from with so much of her life. But the closer Elias got to the farm, the more afraid he became. Not of Samuel, not of Patrick, but of Lydia's eyes when he told the truth. Eyes so used to being hurt, now they might be stabbed again where they hadn't healed. As the Mercer ranch roof appeared in the distance, the faint plumes of smoke from the chimney made Elias breathe a sigh of relief. At least Lydia was still there. At least she didn't know what had happened. At least she was safe in her final moments before the old world came knocking at her door. He tied his horse quickly and walked across the yard. The snow on the porch had been swept away. The entrance was more carefully cleaned than usual, and when he opened the door, the smell of hot soup filled the kitchen, making his heart sink rather than lighten. Lydia was standing by the stove stirring a pot of chicken soup, her hair tied back low, a few strands falling over her shoulders. She turned at the sound of the door. Her eyes were soft, not bright, just the rare calm Elias had grown accustomed to seeing since her arrival. "You're home," Lydia said, her voice soft but warm as fire. "I was planning on warming it up a bit in case you were late." Elias stood there, silent for too long. Lydia frowned slightly. "Are you okay? Is something going on in town?" He wanted to say something, but his throat felt tight. How could he tell her that the nightmare she had just begun to escape was approaching? How could he look into the face that had just overcome last night's fear and instill another fear in it? How could he tell her that this peaceful life might be about to be shattered? Lydia stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. "Elias, what is it?" That touch made him speak. She deserved to know. And Elias was not the kind of man to avoid the truth just because it was difficult. He took a deep breath. "Lydia, someone came to town looking for you." She stood still, like a wooden statue that had just been placed out of place. What, Samuel Hale? Patrick's uncle? The moment Lydia heard that name, her face turned as white as the snow on the porch. Not white from surprise, but white from the blood draining from her body in an instant. Elias immediately stepped forward and took her elbow. "Sit." She shook her head. No. Elias, are you sure? Are you sure he said my name correctly?" "Yes," Elias said slowly, carefully. "He said he was looking for you. He said Patrick wanted you back." Lydia sat down in a chair as if her legs had given out. She held her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Why now?" Her voice cracked. "I left. I ran far away. I thought I could start a new life." Ellis knelt down in front of her, as if he wanted to be at her level so she wouldn't feel cornered. "Lydia, he didn't get you. He doesn't know you're here yet. I said nothing about you. Only I know. Mr. Douglas knows. And we have time." Lydia looked up, her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. "Elias, I really can't go back. If Patrick finds me, he won't let me live. Never." "You won't come back," Elias said, his voice as firm as a nail driven into wood. "I won't let that happen." Lydia looked at him, despair and trust blending into a look that made his heart clench. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "Patrick, he's not easy to turn down. He has money. He has power. He has connections everywhere. The Hales, They don't give up what they think is theirs. Elias took her hand, very gently. You don't belong with them, but in their eyes, I am an asset. No. Elias emphasized each word. You are human, and I will protect you, even in front of that whole family. Lydia laughed painfully. Elias, you can't fight an entire wealthy family just for me. Not fighting, Elias replied, his voice warm but hard as steel. It's standing up. I won't let anyone take you anywhere you don't want to go. Lydia squeezed his hand, making the first move. You don't know Patrick. You think he just wants me to go back to Denver. Elias looked at her. Tell me. I want to understand. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and it was like opening a door she had locked for so long. Patrick doesn't just want me back, Lydia said slowly. He wants to destroy me, little by little. He wants me to be quiet, always quiet, not to react, not to talk back, not to leave. She opened her eyes, and now I did what he hated most. I left. In the thick silence, the wind outside suddenly whistled like a wild horse. The window shook violently, making Lydia jump slightly. Elias held her hand to let her know it was only the wind. After a moment, Lydia spoke very softly. Elias, I'm scared. He placed his warm hand on hers, not squeezing, just holding. I know. You don't blame me. Why should I blame? Because I bring trouble to you, and to the farm, to your life that was so peaceful. Elias shook his head, his eyes softening like the evening fire. Lydia, my life is only peaceful because I let it be. Not because it's actually peaceful, but if trouble comes, I want it to come while there's someone worthy of my protection. He paused, then said something that made the air in the kitchen freeze. And that was you. Lydia raised her hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking slightly. There were no sobs, just the sighs of someone who had just heard something she didn't expect to hear. She asked in a breath filled with emotion, Elias, why did you do this for me? He didn't dodge, because I care about you. Lydia looked at him a long time, as if gauging whether he was telling the truth or just being dutifully kind. But Elias' gaze did not waver. She nodded slightly, like someone clinging to the only thing keeping her from sinking. So, what should we do now? Elias stood up, his eyes returning to the familiar calm of a Western man who knew how to stand firm in the face of snowstorms, life storms, and inner storms. We will be prepared. We will be cautious. And if Samuel comes back, I will face him. He looked straight at her. But Lydia, you won't leave here unless you want to. And for the first time since Lydia had arrived at Mercer Ranch, there was fire in her eyes. Not the fire of fear, but the fire of someone who had had enough and was standing. No, said Lydia. I won't run again. Not again. Elias nodded. So from now on we are no longer the two of us standing alone in this matter. In that moment, no one needed to say it, but they both understood a line had been drawn, and Elias stood by Lydia to the end. That evening, Mercer Ranch was strangely quiet, not the silence of the snow, nor the silence of a coming storm. It was the silence of two people trying to keep their bearings in the face of something too big, too real, too near. After the afternoon's conversation, Lydia hardly said another word. She worked silently, washing dishes silently, gathering firewood silently. Every movement was slow and wispy like smoke, as if she were trying to hold on to something that was slipping through her fingers. Elias stood at a distance, watching her every movement. Her silence now was different from the silence of the early days. It was not defensive. It was not guarded. It was the silence of someone mustering up the courage to face the truth. When dinner was over, Lydia cleared the table, and Elias sat by the fire. It was dark outside. The remaining snow on the roof dripped down like the heartbeat of the night. Elias felt Lydia standing behind him for a long time without coming back to the room. "Lydia," he called softly, not turning around so as not to startle her. She stood still for a few seconds, then spoke softly. "Elias, can I sit for a moment?" "Okay." Elias moved aside, making more space beside him. "Come here." Lydia approached, sitting down on a chair far enough from him to be polite, but still far enough for the heat from the fireplace to touch them both. She crossed her arms over her chest as if to keep the heat to herself. The fireplace burned brightly, the amber light illuminating her face, making her eyes sparkle as if they were strained with long-held memories. She looked at the fire for a long time and then said, "I never told anyone the whole story about me and Patrick." Elias sat still. He didn't push, didn't rush, just waited. Lydia took a deep breath, her voice small but clear. "You asked why I was so afraid of him. Maybe I should tell you. Because if you're willing to stand by me, you deserve to know what I'm facing." Elias tilted his head to look at her. "I'm listening." Lydia clasped her hands together, her knuckles white. "I met Patrick when I was 27. At first he was polite, warm, and good at talking. I thought he was a good guy. I was wrong." She bowed her head, her voice trembling slightly. "Very wrong." Elias said nothing, but his silence was not cold. It was like a large coat thrown over the shoulders of a shivering man. "A few months into our marriage, he started controlling everything I did." Lydia continued, "Where I went, who I met, who I talked to. He wanted to know. At first, it was just gentle questions. Then it was orders. Then it was anger. Then—" She stopped. Elias said softly, "If it's hard to say, take your time." Lydia shook her head. "No, I needed to say it. For the first time in my life, I found myself not speaking to beg for forgiveness, but speaking to live." Elias sighed softly. "I'm here." "After a moment," Lydia continued, "he hit me for the smallest things. A misplaced spoon, a letter I hadn't opened, a call from my mother that I hadn't told him about. Patrick never hit me in the face. He said he didn't want people to see my mess." That made Elias clench his fist, but he remained silent to give her space to continue. "I thought about leaving many times, but he always found me. The last time, I ran away to my mother's house. He came a day early. He dragged me out of the house like a piece of furniture. And he said," Lydia's voice broke into small, glass-sharp shards, "You will never leave me unless I let you." Elias closed his eyes for a second. "Oh, God," he whispered. But it wasn't a curse. It was a pain. Lydia took a deep breath, as if swimming back into the depths of her memory. "The night I ran away, it wasn't because I was brave. It was because I knew if I didn't go that night, I would die. One way or another." A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "I went with just my little suitcase. I took a bus from Denver to Helena, then from Helena to Missoula, and from there I rented a car to Gray Hollow. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew. I had to go somewhere Patrick couldn't find me." She looked at Elias for the first time since the beginning of the story. "Elias, if Samuel is here, that means Patrick has tracked me down." Elias answered immediately, not letting her fear sink in. "No, Samuel doesn't know where you are. He was just asking. But he will come back." "I know. Aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid of being dragged into this?" Elias looked straight at her, his voice low but firm as stone. "Yes, I am human. But being afraid does not mean I will abandon you." Lydia sighed, her shoulders slumping as if she had been carrying a burden for too long. "I got you into big trouble." "No," Elias said, his voice low. "You didn't make me do anything. I chose this." Lydia looked at him, her eyes red but clear. Why, he thought for a few seconds. Not long, because I don't believe God brought you here just so I could look the other way. Lydia let out a small laugh. Small and painful, but also a little warm. You always say things that leave people off guard. Elias smiled very slightly. Then I did something good. A soft silence passed. No wind, no fear, just two people sitting close to each other, not touching, but not far away either. Then Lydia said, Elias, thank you for listening, for not looking at me like I was broken, for not asking why I didn't leave sooner. He shook his head. No one has the right to ask a woman why she didn't run away from the place that hurt her sooner. One can only ask how she didn't have to run. Lydia looked at him for a long time. Then slowly, she reached out and placed her hand on Elias's knee. Elias, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how much I can believe in this life. But today, telling you a story, for me, it was the first time I felt seen. Elias turned his hand slightly, letting his fingers brush hers. You are not just seen, you are respected. Tears fell down Lydia's cheeks, but this time they were tears without fear. After a while, she stood up, breathing lightly. I'm going to sleep. Today, I've talked too much. Elias nodded. Good night, Lydia. She turned back to look at him just before entering the room. Good night, Elias. And thanks for being here. The door closed, and for the first time since she had arrived at Mercer Ranch, Elias realized Lydia no longer trembled in the darkness, because the darkness no longer seemed so frightening. The next morning was strangely bright. Winter light was never bright, but today it was so clear that the snow reflected off the ground in long, mirror-like streaks. Mercer Ranch was brighter than usual, but the peace of the light belied the heaviness that crept into the walls. Elias woke up early. He didn't want Lydia to wake up and see his worried face, though he knew she would know no matter how well he tried to hide it. He made coffee and stood by the window, looking out at the white prairie. The wind was light, gentle like the breath of the earth, but in his heart it was stronger, fiercer. He knew Samuel would come back. He knew Patrick wouldn't give up, and he knew Lydia had confided in him last night, which meant she'd let him get very close to her pain. That made his responsibility all the more significant. Soft footsteps sounded behind him. Lydia stepped out, wearing the light brown cardigan he had seen her neatly folded in her suitcase the first day she arrived. Her face was a little tired, but her eyes were brighter and more alert than last night. Good morning, Elias. Good morning, Elias replied, his voice low and normal. Did you sleep well? Better than I thought. Lydia smiled slightly. They sat down to a simple breakfast bread, eggs, and hot coffee. Lydia was quieter than usual, but not the silence of fear. It was the silence of someone who was thinking, piecing together the fragments of a life that had just come to light. As they finished cleaning up, there was the sound of hooves coming from the dirt road leading into the farmhouse. Elias looked up immediately, his eyes sharp. Lydia put down her bowl, her hands shaking slightly. Is that him? I'll go see, Elias said quickly. You stay inside. But Lydia grabbed his sleeve. Elias, don't go out there alone. He turned back to look at her, a thin smile appearing on his face. I will never walk out into your life alone again. Even so. Elias stepped forward. He opened the door. A cold wind blew against him, but he remained upright. Fortunately, the rider approaching wasn't the one he was worried about. It was Mr. Poe, the town mailman. He had served Gray Hollow for nearly 30 years, his face as old as an autumn field. Good morning. Elias, hello. Poe. Any mail for me today? Mr. Poe held out a small bag. There are some papers and a letter addressed to Lydia. Elias stopped dead. Lydia behind him seemed to stop breathing. A letter to Lydia. A letter addressed to Lydia Shaw. Lydia never received mail in Gray Hollow. No one knew she was here except the three of them. Elias felt his blood run cold. Who sent the letter? Who knew her name? Who came all the way to this farm? Mr. Poe didn't notice the tension. He just smiled and rode on. Elias held the envelope, his hand clenched unconsciously. He turned back into the house. Lydia looked at him with eyes that already knew the answer. From who, she asked in a small voice. Elias handed her the letter, but placed his hand lightly on hers as if to warn her before she touched it. Lydia, if you don't want to open it now, I can keep it. She shook her head. I have to see. Lydia took the envelope slowly. Her eyes traveled around the edge and stopped at the handwriting. It was beautiful, soft. Not a man's, not Patrick's. But when she turned the envelope over, a small line of writing on the back made her shiver. Go home before it's too late. Elias felt her lips turn pale. Let me see. She handed it to him. Elias read the inscription, and he needed no further proof that Samuel had not left Gray Hollow, as he said. Lydia opened the letter. Inside was a white piece of paper, folded in half. She unfolded it and took a deep breath. There was only one line. I forgave once. I will not forgive a second time. No signature. No signature required. Lydia knew. Elias knew. Samuel sent. But the word was from Patrick. Lydia let the letter fall to the table. She sat down in a nearby chair as if her legs were giving out. Her hands were clenched so tightly that her knuckles were showing. Elias, she said, her voice cracking like thin ice. Tell me, am I really dragging you into this? Elias picked up the letter, his eyes darkening. Lydia, you didn't drag me into this. He came in on his own, and I'll come out to meet him. No, Lydia shook her head vigorously. Patrick, you don't know him. Elias, whatever he wants, he will do whatever it takes to get it. And I, Elias said slowly, each word like steel, will not allow anyone to threaten the people living in my house. I will not allow anyone to threaten you. Lydia covered her face with her hands. If I stay here, I'll put you in danger. No. Elias stepped closer, grabbing her shoulders. If you leave, you'll be in danger. You'll be running alone. Patrick wants you to be afraid. I won't let him. Lydia looked up. Elias, you're trying to protect me. But if you confront them, what will they do to you? Patrick isn't a clean player. Elias looked her straight in the eye. I have lived through my own pain. Lydia, I lost Anna, a piece of my soul. Nothing they did to me scared me as much as letting you fall into their hands. Lydia bit her lip, tears falling. But this time, the tears weren't entirely from fear. There was also gratitude, touch, the emotion she'd tried so long to deny with reason. Elias, I don't want you to sacrifice yourself for me. I don't sacrifice, he said, his voice so low and sincere it made Lydia tremble. I choose. The air in the kitchen grew thick, not from fear anymore, but from something larger that was forming in the darkness between them. After a while, Lydia spoke very softly, like someone weighing two sides. If you decide to stand next to me, I also have to make a decision. Elias looked at her, not forcing, not pressing. You say it. Lydia took a deep breath, her eyes red but bright. I won't run anymore. Her voice was clear, strong, unwavering. I will not let Patrick take my life back. Not again. Elias exhaled as if he had just heard what he had been waiting for, but had not dared to expect. Then let us stand together. Lydia nodded. She reached for the letter on the table and folded it slowly. Her hand was no longer shaking. Her hand was slender but steady. From today on, I will no longer be silent, she said. Elias smiled slightly. That's just like you. They looked at each other for a long time, and from that moment, without the old storm or the threatening letter to confirm it, they both knew something between them had changed, unspoken, unnamed, but it's bigger than fear and stronger than pain. That afternoon, the weather turned colder than usual. The sun had not yet set, but the light was already gray, as if winter was about to swallow the steppe. Thick clouds rolled in from the south, streaking the sky in inky black. The wind was light, but it crept in through the cracks of the windows, signaling a chilly night. Elias went out to the stables to tidy up the hay. He wanted a few quiet hours to think about how to prepare if Samuel returned with his men. He knew he had to fix the stable latches, retie the north fence, bring in more water in case it froze. But mostly he was just trying to keep himself calm. Because this morning's letter is still fresh in my mind. Inside, Lydia was folding clothes, her hands quick and steady, as if she were trying to keep herself from panicking. She wasn't shaking like she had the first few days, but there was still something fragile about her eyes, like someone who had just stepped over a broken bridge without looking down. She put the last shirt in the closet, closed the door, and leaned against the wall. Elias had said he would protect her, but Patrick and the Hales were not easy to deal with. Lydia took a deep breath, trying to steady her breathing. She had promised herself that she would never run again, never stay silent, never let anyone dictate her life again. But that promise had to be backed by action, and action took courage. And courage never comes easily to someone who has lived in fear for so long. She walked out the door, intending to find Elias and ask if he needed help, when suddenly the sound of horse hooves echoed from afar. The sound was not hurried, not loud, but steady and sure, not like Elias' hoarse voice, not like the postman. Lydia stopped, her hands clenched reflexively on the doorframe. Elias heard from the stables, too. He stood up straight, his eyes on the road leading to the farm. A figure on horseback was approaching, and the closer he got, the more tense Elias felt his body become. Not Samuel, not Patrick, but not the one he recognized. The man dismounted from his horse in front of the porch. He was about 45, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face devoid of smiles and the cold confidence of those accustomed to relying on great power. His brown leather jacket was strangely clean, as if he had come not to help a farm, but to negotiate or threaten. Elias stepped onto the porch before he could knock. "Who are you looking for?" Elias asked, his voice low and without any beating around the bush. The man looked him up and down, as if assessing whether he was a threat or not. "I am looking for a woman named Lydia Shaw." Elias didn't blink. "There's no one by that name here." The man raised an eyebrow. "The strange thing is, I heard from the townspeople that there is a strange woman living on your farm." "I never said that. I didn't say you said it," he replied, a faint smile appearing but not reaching his eyes. Rumors sometimes travel faster than one would like. Elias was silent. The man continued. "My name is Bowie Hart. I work for the Hale family." Elias's heart pounded in his chest. Bowie looked around the yard as if the farm were something that shouldn't exist. "I heard Lydia left Denver in disarray. The Hales are worried about her safety." Elias clenched his fists. "She left for her reasons. None of your business." Bowie Hart laughed. "Her reasons don't matter. The Hale family asked her to return to Denver to deal with personal matters, and I was just doing my job. The Hale family has no right to ask for that." "You're wrong," Bowie said, his eyes narrowing. "In their eyes, she's Patrick Hale's wife, and a wife should be with her husband." Elias took a step forward. "You can't come in here, and you can't see her." Bowie tilted his head. "Are you sure you want to take on the Hale family? I certainly want to protect the person in my house." Bowie raised his eyebrows again. "You sound like a man. emotionally involved in other people's affairs? Elias didn't react, but one look in his eyes told her that the sentence hit the spot he was trying to hide. Bowie chuckled. I'll be back. And next time I won't be alone. I won't stop you from coming back, Elias replied, his voice as low as shifting earth. But I will stop you from passing through this farm gate. Bowie paused for a few seconds, as if gauging whether Elias was being reckless or just talking tough. Finally, he turned his horse around. Good day, Mr. Mercer. His voice was full of sarcasm. And good luck. You'll need it. As he walked away, Lydia came out the door. She stood a few feet away from Elias. Her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Elias, who was that? He turned back to look at her. Bowie Hart, Patrick's men. Right. Lydia took a step back. So that means Patrick knows where I am. Elias shook his head. No. If he knew for sure, he wouldn't ask. He's testing. Lydia placed her hand on her chest, taking a deep breath as if the air was harder to swallow than usual. Elias, this is getting out of hand. No, Elias said slowly, firmly, and strongly. This is your home. This is not just yours anymore. Lydia looked at him, her eyes glistening but not tearful. You don't understand. What they'll do to get me back. They'll do anything. Patrick. He won't stop. I don't know his limits, Elias replied. But I know mine, and I won't let him cross them. Elias. He stepped closer to Lydia, but stopped before he was too close for her to back away. Lydia, I say this not because I am braver than anyone else. It is because I know what it is like to lose someone you love, and I will not let you be taken from this place like you are less than human. Lydia looked at him for a long time. The wind blew through the eaves. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. Elias. Her voice was soft and trembling. I know I have no one else but you. Elias didn't touch her, but his eyes softened like the evening fire. You have me, but not because you have no one else, but because you deserve someone to stand beside you. Lydia let out a long breath, like someone who had finally allowed herself to not have to be strong alone anymore. I'm scared, she said honestly, for the first time without trying to hide it. I know, Elias replied, but I would fear what happens to you more than I would fear them. In that moment, Lydia took a step forward. She didn't hug him. She didn't touch him. But she stood so close that Elias could feel her thin breath touching the air between them. Thank you, Elias. Without you, you don't need to say more, Elias said softly. I understand. Lydia chuckled, a weak but genuine smile. So, how do we prepare? Elias looked out at the pale field. A man like Bowie wouldn't come alone unless he was testing me. Next time, he'll come in larger numbers. So from now on, we have to be ready, Lydia continued, her voice different. No more shaking, no more despair, only newfound strength. Elias nodded. Yes, and in the cold afternoon light, in the middle of the vast steppe, two people stood side by side in the same direction, not because of fate, not because of running away, but because they chose each other in the most silent but profound way. Night fell over Gray Hollow like a thick blanket, not the familiar, gentle, western darkness, but a weighty darkness, as if it were waiting for something to happen. The wind whistled through the eaves in long, drawn-out sounds, mixed with the creaking of the wooden fence. There was no snow, but the chill seeped through the cracks in the doors, making the air feel heavier. Inside, Elias was rekindling the fire in the fireplace. The dry logs caught quickly, crackling steadily, but that didn't lessen the tension that seeped into every breath. Lydia sat in a chair by the window, looking out. She wasn't as shaky as she had been those first evenings at the farmhouse, but there was something about her eyes that made Elias glance at her every so often to make sure she was okay. They hadn't spoken about Bowie's presence since the afternoon. Perhaps because they both knew that the silence tonight wasn't a silence to avoid being hurt, but a silence to hear every sound outside. Finally, Lydia spoke first. "Elias, do you think they will come tonight?" Elias put down the poker and turned to look at her. "I hope not. But I never rely on hope when facing people like Bowie." Lydia looked straight at him, her eyes bathed in the firelight. "I'm sorry for bringing this into your life." Elias approached, stopping in front of her chair. "Lydia, I told you, this is my choice, not your burden. But you could be in danger," she said, her voice low and heavy, like a confession of guilt. "You deserve better than that." "I lived peacefully," Elias replied, his voice as deep as a rock, "but not alive." Lydia looked at him for a long time, as if his words had opened a door she had never touched before. Elias continued, "There is someone in the house. There is someone I want to protect. There is someone who makes me feel like my heart is no longer empty." He paused. A sigh filled the air. "It's no burden." "Lydia, it's the best thing I've had in years." Lydia bowed her head slightly. "Elias, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied, as light as mist. "You just need to be here." The moment between them was strangely peaceful, as if there was no danger approaching outside. But that peace was quickly broken. A small sound, very small, like a rock being kicked. Lydia looked up immediately, her eyes fixed on the window. Elias recognized the sound immediately. He stood up in one breath, walked over and blew out some of the fire to darken the room. "Stay here," he said softly, firmly. Lydia didn't protest, but her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Elias walked to the front door, standing to the side to avoid seeing if anyone was outside. He peered through the blinds. No one, no horse. But the strange feeling at the back of his spine told him that the darkness out there was no longer alone. He turned back to Lydia. "Don't leave this room, no matter what you hear." She nodded, but her eyes couldn't hide the returning fear. Elias took his father's old rifle from the rack near the kitchen. He checked the ammunition, his movements quick and practiced. He stepped out onto the porch, closing the door quietly behind him. The night air seeped into his coat and made him shiver, but he kept his breathing steady and looked around. There was no light in the distance, no sound of horses, no sound of people. There was only wind, but wind did not make the rocks creak. Wind did not blow dry grass against the wooden wall, just as someone asked Lydia a question. Elias walked down the 3 steps and out into the courtyard. Darkness enveloped him, but his eyes, accustomed to the western night, quickly discerned the slightest changes in the landscape. After a few minutes of standing in silence, Elias realized what was troubling him. Horse tracks, not many, 1 or 2. Footprints, light, not toward the farm but around to the stables behind. Elias turned back to the door, about to go inside when a figure appeared from the corner of the house. "Don't make a noise. Mercer." Elias spun around quickly, gun aimed at the voice, but the man who stepped out raised his hands in a gesture of not wanting to fight. "It's Bowie Hart." He had no daytime arrogance, no sneer, just a serious face and calculating eyes that looked at Elias. "What are you doing here?" Elias asked, his voice sharp as steel. "I warned you." "I remember," Bowie replied. "But I didn't come tonight because of Patrick's orders." Elias narrowed his eyes. "You expect me to believe that, believe it or not," Bowie said. "But there is something you need to know, and let me say it only once." Elias remained silent, his gun still unloaded. Bowie let out a tired breath. "Patrick plans to come here tomorrow night, not to talk, not to negotiate. He plans to take Lydia away, by any means." Elias tightened his grip on the gun. "What makes you say that?" "Because I don't want to get involved in a murder," Bowie replied, looking straight at Elias. "And if anything happens to Mercer Ranch, I know Patrick will blame me first." Elias looked at him for a long time, as if weighing his words. "You came here alone, just to warn me." Bowie shrugged. "Just to remind you to get out of this while you still can." Elias took a step forward, his voice low but steely. "I'm not going anywhere." "I guess so," Bowie replied. "Then you must be prepared." Elias did not reply. Bowie stepped back into the shadows. "There is no enmity between you and me," he said, "but between you and Patrick. You don't know him." Elias watched him disappear into the darkness, not chasing after him. He himself did not know how to react. Bowie was not a good man, but he did not lie tonight. Elias went back into the house. Lydia stood in the middle of the room, her eyes wide with panic when she saw him return. "What happened? Are you okay?" Elias put the gun down on the table. "We have a day." "Are they coming?" Lydia said, her voice shaking so much that even the firelight couldn't warm it. "Tomorrow," Elias replied. "Patrick will come, and he won't come to talk." Lydia backed away, her hand over her mouth as if she had just heard a death sentence. "Elias, oh, I don't want you to face him. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Elias stepped forward and placed his hand on her shoulder. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do." "But you," she choked, "I'm afraid of losing you." Elias paused. His heart clenched for a beat. It was the first time Lydia had said it, the first time she had admitted that he had become an inseparable part of her life. Elias placed his hand on her cheek, so gently that he feared she would disappear. "You will not lose me. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. You can't know that." "No," Elias said slowly. "But I know I'm not going anywhere." Lydia looked at him, a moment as long and deep as a winter lake. She nodded slightly. "I will stand beside you." Elias did not smile, but his eyes lit up, like a fire suddenly flaring up in a fireplace. "The two of us," he said. "No one can take this away from us." Outside, the wind howled. The darkness stirred as if it were alive. Tomorrow would be a storm, but tonight they had crossed a new line of trust and love that needed no words. The next dawn never really came. The morning light was a pale ash blanket across the sky. The clouds were so thick that the sun could not penetrate them, casting everything in a cold, metallic gray. The wind picked up, whipping the wooden fence posts with a strange dampness that signaled a storm was coming. Elias stood on the porch, leaning against the wooden post. He wasn't the type to worry so much about everything happening at once, but since last night, when Bowie had appeared more as a warning than a threat, he'd known that this day would be unlike any other he'd had since living on the farm. The wind blew through his hair, carrying the smell of damp earth, the cold of the storm, and a hint of an approaching stranger. He looked out across the field, where the dry grasses trembled in the wind. That was where Patrick would appear, and he knew he had to face it, not because of pride or to prove anything to Lydia, but because of a much simpler truth he could not stand by and watch someone try to destroy what was blooming inside him, something as fragile as the first light of day, but so strong that he could not back down. The back door opened. Lydia stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a thick cream-colored coat. Her hair was blown by the wind, but her eyes were bright and alert, no longer desperate. Elias turned to look at her, feeling warm and worried, like someone looking at a treasure he feared a strong wind might blow away. "You wake up early," she said, her voice as light as mist but full of inner strength. "Couldn't sleep," Elias replied, his eyes still on the long dirt road. "You too. I heard the wind since 3 a.m. Lydia smiled faintly. "I think today will be rough." "No," Elias admitted, "but we knew that last night." Lydia stepped beside him. "Elias, I've been thinking all night. I know Patrick won't give up. He won't give up what he believes is his. But She paused for a moment, as if trying to sort out the thoughts swirling in her mind. "I'm not his. Never." Elias turned to look at her. The words were not loud, but they were stronger than the storm outside. "Lydia," Elias said in a low voice, "you don't have to prove it to yourself today. You don't have to say or do anything to make me believe it. I knew it the moment you told me the truth. No." She shook her head. "I have to. I need to. Patrick has taken away my right to speak for too long. I will not be silent today." Elias looked into her eyes, saw new courage and old fear merging into a woman far stronger than she thought. He placed his hand on hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. "No matter what happens, I stand by you." Lydia took a deep breath. "I know." They stood together for a long moment before Elias went back inside to make final preparations. He checked his gun, arranged a few items in the kitchen in case they needed to take cover inside. But in his heart, he prayed he wouldn't have to use any of them. Violence had never been his way, though life had forced him to defend what he couldn't afford to lose many times. Lydia walked around the house, checking the windows and the back door. She gathered up a few important things: Patrick's letter, the threatening note, and an old handkerchief of her mother's that she kept as a talisman. Her hands shook sometimes, but she didn't stop. She had lived half her life in fear, and the rest couldn't begin if she backed away today. It was near noon when Elias heard the first sound. A single gallop. No, more. 4, 5, maybe 6. He stepped out onto the porch, standing tall, his eyes sharper than blades. Figures emerged from the dirt road. The sound of hooves grew heavier. The wind whipped at their cloaks, making them look like riders riding out of a storm. Leading the way is Patrick Hale. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat and a thick coat, and sat on a tall brown horse. His face was frighteningly calm, the calm of a man who knew he had power, money, and people at his command. He stopped at the farmhouse gate, not dismounting immediately, but observing Elias as if appraising an item. "Elias Mercer," he said loudly, his voice carrying arrogance in the wind. "I have come to get my wife back." Elias did not reply. He just stood there, not backing away, not bowing his head. "She does not want to go back." Patrick laughed. "A woman like Lydia often says things they don't understand. You don't need to interfere in our family affairs." "She knows very well," Elias replied, his voice as sharp as stone against steel. "She left you because she was afraid, and she will not return." Patrick tilted his head. "You think you can protect her from me, I don't think." "I know." A few people behind Patrick chuckled, but Patrick raised his hand, and they fell silent immediately. He looked at Elias like a predator, patiently watching its last remaining prey. "I don't want to have to do anything to you, Mercer," Patrick said, "because you're not involved. But if you keep her, you'll be considered a kidnapper." Elias narrowed his eyes. "She came here voluntarily. No one saw her coming," Patrick replied. "But a lot of people will see me take her home." Elias did not reply, but a fire burned in his eyes. The door opened. Lydia stepped out. Patrick's entire group turned to look, and the moment Patrick's eyes met Lydia's, Elias saw what he tried to hide: obsession. Lydia stood straight, her hands steady. "Patrick, I am not your wife." Patrick glanced at Elias, then back at Lydia. "You said that because you were scared, because you were affected. I wouldn't blame you." Lydia shook her head. "I say it because it's the truth. I'm not going back. Not today. Not ever." Patrick frowned, showing his discomfort for the first time. "You have no right to say that." "I do," Lydia replied, her voice clear and strong. "I don't own you." The air between them was so tense that even a stronger wind could tear it apart. Patrick laughed, but it was venomous. "Elias Mercer made you believe that nobody makes me believe," Lydia replied. "I am confident." Patrick turned to Elias, his eyes dark. "You think you can keep her from me? You think she'll choose you?" a man living alone on the moor with a few old horses and dead memories. Elias did not react. No need. Lydia answered for him. Patrick, I choose a life without you. Patrick's face changed. For the first time during the encounter, he was no longer calm. I'm saying this for the last time. Come here. Lydia didn't move. Patrick jerked the reins, and the horse jumped as if to throw itself at Elias. But before he could charge, Elias stepped forward, placing himself between Lydia and him. If you want her, Elias said, his voice low, deep, and steady, then go through me. No yelling, no defiance, just the truth. Patrick looked at Elias, then at his men. Elias was not shaking. He realized he was not afraid, and the man without fear was the most dangerous man of all. In that moment, the storm really came, not from the sky, but from two men standing face to face, in a fight not so much for possession, but for the right to live freely of a woman whose voice and heart had been taken away. The wind howled fiercely. The sky darkened another notch. The final confrontation was about to begin. The wind whipped harder, carrying a thin dust cloud that swirled ominously in front of the farmyard. It wasn't raining, but the sky was heavy as if it were about to fall over the prairie. Patrick sat on his horse, his eyes cold and sorrowful as he watched Elias stand in front of Lydia. The horse's breath billowed in white clouds, mixing with the wind like the gasp of an inevitable confrontation. Lydia stood behind Elias, close enough to feel the warmth of his body, but far enough away that she wouldn't get in his way if things got worse. Her arms tightened around her, but she didn't retreat into the house. She chose to stand here, staring straight at the thing she feared most. Patrick took a deep breath, as if fighting back a long-standing anger. Elias Mercer, step aside. I'm taking my wife home. Elias did not move. She is not your wife. Patrick tightened his grip on the reins in frustration. Every word you say makes me lose my patience. She's mine. I chose her. I raised her. I make all the decisions for her. Lydia felt a chill run down her spine at that. The past came rushing back like a gust of wind, but this time she didn't retreat into the shadows of fear. She took a step forward, standing close enough to Elias for Patrick to see her face clearly. Patrick, Lydia said, her voice low but each word clear, I am not your property. Never. Never. Patrick looked at her, his eyes changing. Not with pain, not with regret, but with anger at being defied. I don't know what I'm doing, he said, his voice cracking. I can't stand on my own. I need someone to guide me. You're the only one who can do that. I can stand on my own, Lydia answered immediately. Unshaken, I've just never been allowed to. Elias glanced at her, his eyes shining with quiet pride. Patrick laughed, a lopsided laugh. Stand up. You ran away in the middle of the night. You hid. No money, no family, no help. At the end of the day, you still need someone to protect you. Lydia looked him straight in the eye. Yes, I needed someone to protect me, but not you, and not to possess me, but to find myself, Patrick growled. And he did that. He pointed at Elias. A lonely stable boy living in the middle of the moor. Elias remained silent. He did not need to defend himself against those words. Patrick spoke from his own fear, not the truth. Lydia answered for him, as if this had never been up for debate. Elias didn't force me. He didn't control me. He didn't want to own me. He just stood next to me. Patrick was silent. It was something he did not understand, had never understood, and could not accept. Enough, Patrick said quietly, but sharply. I'll give you one last chance. Follow me, or I'll make him regret interfering. Elias spoke now. If you want to hurt me, go ahead, but don't touch Lydia. Patrick turned his eyes to Elias, his face contorted in unconcealed anger. Do you really think you can stand against me?" "It's not me," Elias replied. "It's the truth, and her decision. You can't beat that." In that moment, Lydia felt her heart tighten, not because she was afraid of Patrick, but because Elias had put his life at her mercy. No strings attached, no demands. It was something no one had ever done for her before. Patrick signaled to the two men behind him. "Take her." The two men spurred their horses forward, intending to circle around Elias and approach Lydia. But Elias stepped forward, blocking their path, eyes fixed on them. He raised his gun, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it level in front of him, a clear warning. "Don't," Elias said, his voice clear despite the strong wind. The two men stopped their horses. They looked at Patrick, waiting for orders. Patrick gritted his teeth. "Are you men or shadows?" Go, but before they could move, Lydia stepped out, passing Elias. Elias took her hand and pulled her gently back. "Lydia, no." She shook her head, gently removing his hand from hers. "I need to do this." She stepped out into the middle of the yard, standing in front of Patrick, no longer avoiding him. "Patrick," Lydia said, "if you still want to drag me back, you'll have to drag a dead body, because I won't live my old life again. I won't let you touch me, won't let you speak for me, won't let you silence me again." Patrick glared. "You don't know what I'm going to do?" "I know," Lydia replied, her voice as steady as the ground beneath her feet. "And I'm not afraid anymore." The wind whipped Lydia's robes up, her hair flying toward Elias. The sight made her look like a figure standing in the storm, but not consumed by it, defying it. Patrick was speechless for a few seconds. For perhaps the first time in his life, he was faced with something he could not control. Lydia looked at him for a few more seconds, then said one last sentence, as softly as a farewell. "Patrick, it's over between us." Patrick pulled the reins so hard the horse reared. "Lydia, you'll regret it." She shook her head. "I only regret not leaving you sooner." Patrick looked around, saw his men hesitate. He realized he couldn't press any further without making things worse, something that would only cost him more than it gained. Finally, he jerked the reins and turned his horse around. "Let's go," he ordered. The four people behind also turned their heads. The horses trampled on the hard snow, creating heavy sounds, each sound like a full stop. As they disappeared down the long dirt road, the wind died down, the clouds parted. The pale light of a late winter afternoon shone down on the farmyard, as if the sky had breathed a sigh of relief with them. Lydia stood still, watching until she could see no more. Her shoulders slumped, not from exhaustion, but because for the first time in years she felt truly free. Elias walked over to her. "Lydia, are you okay?" She turned back, her eyes soft and deep like a lake that had just calmed down. "I'm fine, and I think I've been born again." Elias smiled slightly. "You are very brave." Lydia looked at him, the light in her eyes no longer filled with fear, but with a new peace. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be standing here." Elias shook his head. "You stand by yourself. I'll just stand next to you." Lydia sighed softly, as if exhaling a heavy past to step into an unknown but hopeful future. "Elias," she said, her voice low but clear, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to stay here, at Mercer Ranch, with you." Elias looked at her, not overly happy, not in a hurry to answer. He just stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cold of the west. "Lydia," Elias said, "there will always be a place for you in this house. Not because of duty, not because I saved you, but because you deserve a place to call home." The breeze was blowing again. Like the first touch of spring, the fireplace was still burning, and for the first time in years, tomorrow felt more than just a new day. It was the beginning of a new life, a life of freedom, a life of choice. and maybe a life together. Elias and Lydia's story reminds us that anyone, no matter what age, can enter a new birth. We are never too old to be loved, to choose what is good for us, or to walk away from what hurts us. True love is not about possessing, but about standing by each other when the other trembles. And sometimes the bravest thing is not to confront another person, but to face the fear that has haunted us all our lives. Finally, silence can be strength, when we choose to be silent with old pain and open to new peace. At 60 or 70, we understand better than anyone the value of peace. And this story reminds us it is never too late to choose a life worthy of our hearts. Thank you for listening to the story. If the story touches your emotions, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying us on the next humane journeys.